It's been a while since my original video on Warzone 2's audio, and when they announced that there'd be some submix audio changes in Season 2 Reloaded, a lot of people on social media mentioned that my video had recently come about, and maybe that these changes were because of the findings in the video. Maybe that is the case, and I don't want to take too much credit, but hopefully they did see it and saw some of the issues present in the audio mix. So today I decided to go back into Warzone 2, both in a live environment and in some closed testing, and see if things had actually improved. And the answer is yes. Footstep audio in Warzone 2 is drastically better than ever before. There are a few instances where things still need a little bit of tweaking, but for the most part, the audio changes that we saw in Season 2 Reloaded have greatly changed and greatly improved the overall soundscaping in Warzone 2. And I'll give you some things to play with in this video in terms of editing your settings to get the best out of it. Now, I've done this with and without my own audio effects just to make sure that what I was hearing was correct and how I thought things were working was correct, and did a little bit of testing with some bots in a closed environment as well. And the central fix, which really has had a knock-on effect with everything else in the game, is that they have changed the submix in terms of enemy footstep audio. And what this means is that enemy footstep audio is now louder, the distance that you can perceive it from is also somewhat louder because the priority is higher, and it's also in turn reduced some of the excessive audio from things like cluster strikes and airstrikes. Now yes, if these things are right on top of you outside in the open, you probably won't hear footstep audio, but if you are inside a building and it lands nearby or in the distance, you most definitely will hear the footstep audio of the opponents around you, whereas before, you definitely wouldn't. My theory behind this is that prior to that update, they were trying to treat all of the audio priority effectively the same, including footstep audio, and never really giving priority to one sound cue over another. And in doing so, yes, it does create a somewhat realistic environment of what's going on, but it doesn't create a good gameplay experience. In providing more priority for footstep audio, this actually reduces the overall sound of some of the other audio in the game. And the two big ones, and the ones that are the most consequential, or three big ones even, are vehicles, kill streaks, and firing your own weapon. Depending on the distance of the vehicle, you will now hear footsteps, especially if you're inside a building. The same applies to kill streaks, especially if you're inside a building, but the same doesn't really apply for firing your weapon. When you fire your gun, that is without a doubt the loudest sound in the game. I've done all sorts of tests by throwing some airstrikes into the distance and letting a bunch of bots in a Modern Warfare multiplayer game effectively attack me over and over again, and the findings are all the same. It isn't a huge shift in audio priority, but it's small enough that it actually opens the soundscape for Warzone 2. And if you're in a close quarters environment where most gunfights take place, you are more likely to hear enemy footstep audio than you ever were before. Out of all of the tests I've done, I would highly recommend just using the headphones audio mix in Warzone 2. I've tried PC, I've tried headphones, I've tried surround, I've tried pretty much everything at this point, but I think headphones is now the most adaptive stereo output that you're seeing in the game. Stereo outputs are by default 2 channels, yes, but they don't create a false sense of surrounding. And I think the stereo channel has done a really good job in terms of splitting the audio, making it clear when footsteps are nearby and when they're not. So I would really recommend this setting going forward from Season 2 Reloaded. The other sort of stark issue with Warzone 2 is that you kind of need to play the game at as loud a volume as you're allowed to. I use a VST known as LoudMax to reduce the overall sound of gunshot audio whilst keeping the other audio fairly loud, and that allows me to play the game at 100% volume, despite the ear bleed that may incur. Now, for you need to try and get this as high as humanly possible without hurting or harming your own ears. You need to try and maximize the effects volume in the game, turning off things like music, and trying to get the most from that specific audio channel. If you want to know the exact headphones I'm using, it's the Biodynamic DT770 Pros, but for the most part, just any good gaming headset or any good headset with decent stereo output, Astros, SteelSeries, headsets along that line should produce really solid stereo audio. And my suggestion is to load into a solo round, duos, trios, quads, whatever, and disable all other audio. Make sure your music is off, disable voice chat, Don't be in a party chat with your friends, and just see what level of loudness you can achieve in the game before factoring in things like voice chat, and try and get that as high as you humanly can without it being uncomfortable. Now, there are still some instances where audio is not working as intended. So things are generally, I would say, 95 to 90% of the way fixed, but there are a few things I have noticed. The first one is parachute audio is a little bit scruffy in places. It is better than it was, but it can still sometimes be overridden by other audio. And the only other instance that I've majorly noticed is if a certain asset in the game doesn't have a correct texture or audio cue associated to the physical in-game item. So there have been certain things that I've ran over, like a certain brick or a certain can on the floor, where it hasn't made an audio sound for footsteps. It's fairly rare and it doesn't happen often, and in fact, I think they've actually gone over a lot of these textures to make sure that isn't the case, but it can still happen. It's very rare, isn't something that happens very frequently, but it is one of the ways that you won't hear footstep audio. And the final thing that I think needs improvement is a little bit of directional audio, especially on the up and down channels, because discerning whether somebody is above you or below you in Warzone is quite difficult to do. And again, I'm utilizing multiple different styles of headsets, JBL Quantums, Astros, biodynamic headphones, all giving me the same result, that being able to discern and tell the difference between something above and below you isn't something that's very simple in COD. And that's the only major flaw I think I see in the current audio mix. But I can say that footstep audio right now, for me, is about 95% done, and there are very few instances I've ran into over the last couple of days of playing where footstep audio has not worked for me. So take this with somewhat of a pinch of salt, but I think I'm confident enough to say at this point that Warzone 2 is looking really good in terms of footstep audio, and with a few more minor tweaks, the audio in this game is going to be in a really nice spot. Please try some of the suggestions that I mentioned, especially in terms of testing the audio and turning off other distractions when you do so, and hopefully you can refine your footstep audio in Warzone 2. As always folks, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next video.